Okay, today we're going to talk about what I think is an incredibly important part of this whole Kennedy assassination ordeal is Oswald's first assassination attempt, okay? Now we're going to kind of back up to the weekend of March 9th and 10th, 1963. What's that? Yeah. So again, Oswald's first assassination attempt. Now just out of curiosity, how many of you before you took this class heard of the Kennedy assassination in some way, shape, or form? And how many had heard that Lee Harvey Oswald had been the one to shoot the president? Okay, how many ever heard there was a first assassination attempt, that he tried to kill somebody else? And some of you might have. But this is, I'm telling you, Burke's one of 12 people that maybe heard of that in this room. Yeah, but I mean, you heard a little bit about it, and I'd say that might be about the percentage of people in America that know anything about it, you know what I mean? And so it's important. So on the weekend of March 10th, on the weekend of March 9th and 10th, 1963, now think about that, March, April, May, June, till November, quite a bit before November, right? April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, 8 months, over 8 months prior to the assassination, Oswald was photographing the alley which ran behind the home of Major General Edwin A. Walker. So on the weekend of March 9th and 10th of 1963, more than 8 months prior to the assassination of President Kennedy, Lee Harvey Oswald is photographing the alley which ran behind the home of Major General Edwin A. Walker. Picture that in your mind. He's in an alley taking photographs behind the home of Major General Edwin A. Walker. Now your first question has to be, who in the world is Major General Edwin A. Walker? Well, he was a highly controversial figure during the early 1960s, and he was now a civilian living in Dallas. Okay? So Walker was a very highly controversial figure, and I'll tell you why, in the early 1960s, and he was at the time a civilian living in Dallas. He was no longer active, okay? Now, here are 3 things you could describe Walker as, okay? This is a description of General Edwin Walker, a highly controversial figure during the early 1960s, who is now a civilian, okay? He could be described as, number 1, a right-wing extremist. And he was. He was a right-wing extremist. Okay, number 2, he was an anti-communist. So he didn't particularly like what? Russia or Cuba. Okay? He was a right-wing extremist and an anti-communist. Did not like communism anywhere. Russia, Cuba, anywhere. The third thing he was is a segregationalist. Okay? That means what? He wants the separation of blacks and whites. He's racist. So he's a right-wing extremist, he's an anti-communist, and he's a segregationist. Now, the last 2 didn't pretty much describe anybody maybe at that time. A lot of people in the United States were anti-communists, a lot of them were racist, but he also was a right-wing extremist. Now, he had a huge following, especially in the South. He was very popular among Southerners at this time, okay? Very popular. Because a lot of Southerners were right-wing extremists, a lot of Southerners were anti-communists, and a lot of Southerners were segregationists. So he was very popular in the South among many people, not just in Texas, but all over. And he was a major general in our armed forces, so they knew him. Well, Oswald outlined a plan to assassinate General Walker. Because in his mind, he needed to shoot somebody important. Okay? Why else would you do this? Okay, so he's in the alley photographing the alley behind the home of Major General Walker because he's got a plan to assassinate him, to kill him. Okay, he wants to kill somebody important. What's he looking for? Attention. And I'm going to give you my opinion in a way later on why he's looking for this type of attention. I'll spill some of it today. Well, one thing that was photographed by Oswald that weekend in March was a stack of brush that lay just to the east of Walker's home. What do I mean by a stack of brush?
Like a hay pile or?
Well, kind of not hay, but overgrowth, vegetation that was growing, okay, along a fence or whatever, okay? So he's just like, not weeds and brush and parts of maybe a bush or something. He actually photographed a big log area of brush. And what would you do with that brush? You would hide something. And what it was a visual cue to find the hiding place. Of what? Well, he's going to hide the gun there. Very good. So the photograph was Oswald's visual cue to make sure he could find the hiding place where he planned to leave his rifle for the assassination. Okay? He wasn't going to walk down the alley with it the day he decided to shoot Walker. He was already going to have it stashed there, so all he had to do was get it. Okay? Does everybody kind of follow us? Okay. Well, on Sunday, April 7th, almost a month later, Oswald left his apartment with the gun underneath his raincoat. On Sunday, April 7th, 1963, Oswald left his apartment with the gun underneath his raincoat. He took the weapon to the brush that he had photographed and left the rifle there. On April 7th, a Sunday, 1963, he leaves his apartment on 214 West Neely Street, takes the rifle and hides it in that brush that he had photographed. And he left it there for 3 nights. Left it there for 3 nights. Night of the 7th, night of the 8th, and night of the 9th. That next Wednesday, April 10th, 1963, he left Marina a note in Russian telling her his plan and what to do if he was caught. He left her this note, and Ruth Payne talked about this note. Yes, and we'll talk about that. So, on Wednesday, April 10th, Oswald left Marina a note written in Russian, and I'm going to give you a copy of it, telling her his plan, telling her that he was going to go shoot General Walker, and what to do if he was apprehended. After writing the note and leaving it for Marina, he proceeded to General Walker's home and arrived approximately 9 p.m. that evening. So after leaving Marina a note in Russian telling her his plan and what to do if he was apprehended, he proceeded to General Walker's home and he arrived there at 9 p.m. that night. Obviously, on his way, he stopped and got the rifle from the hiding spot. Well, in the alley by Walker's house was a low lattice fence. You know what a lattice fence is? Anybody know what lattice is? Yeah, it's like, have you ever seen people put lattice on the bottom of their decks to make sure nothing gets underneath it? It's kind of a real, it looks like a kind of in sheets, but it's like this. Slats, and then there's slats this way. Okay, lattice, it's real thin. Anyway, there was he got behind a low lattice fence, okay? Well, inside the house, and he could see Walker, the shades were raised and the interior lights were on. And Walker was sitting about 100 feet, not yards, feet from where Oswald was crouched down on the lattice fence. So inside Walker's house, the window shades were raised wide open, the interior lights were on, and General Walker was sitting approximately 100 feet from where Oswald was crouched down by the lattice fence. That's 30 yards. I'm going to guess from this wall to that wall's 20, don't you think, probably?
Oh, no, that's probably...
Well, here's the yard. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm off. 11. So about 3 times as long as this room is how far he's away. So probably from here to the guidance office. Would that be somewhat fair? Down the hallway from here to the guidance office, okay? Well, the general sat in plain view. He was sitting motionless at his desk, He had his shirt collar open, his long sleeves rolled up past his elbow, and he was concentrating on his income tax return, which was due in 5 days. What day is this? April 10th. When are your taxes due? April 15th. Okay? So Walker's sitting there with open windows, lights on, in clear view, sitting at his desk. Usually wore a tie, had his shirt open, collar open, had his long sleeves rolled up, and he was concentrating on his income tax return that was due in 5 days. So picture this, I don't even know if you have to write it down, just picture this. Oswald then rises from his crouch, steadies the gun on the lattice fence, and sights the general's head right in the scope. Right in the scope, believing there's no way he misses. This is the easiest shot he's ever going to have. He's a sharpshooter in the Marines. He can shoot accurately in 200 yards. This is 30 yards. Okay? So Walker's face filled the scope through Oswald's right eye. He squeezed the trigger and fired. Oswald didn't even wait to see if the bullet found its target. He scurried off and hid the weapon almost immediately where it was before. So he fires, thinking there's no way he's missing at 30 yards, fires, hurries up and scurries off, stuffs the weapon back in the brush, takes off. This is probably going to be a bad drawing, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. If you know anything about old window panes, they had wood dividers. So here's Walker's head, so to speak. Of course, he's away from this. The bullet hits that very thin divider on the window and misses Walker, just barely misses his head. Now, Walker was injured in the forearm by fragments of the bullet, okay? But the bullet from 30 yards off, I don't know where he's aiming, but it hit, like, for example, there on the window pane and deflected and missed Walker's head by just barely. But it did send bullet fragments into his arm, his forearm. Now, General Walker was later quoted as saying about this, he said, quote, "It was right at 9 o'clock. I heard a blast and a crack right over my head." Well, think about Walker. He's uncertain of what has occurred. Go ahead.
Was that all Oswald could see was his head?
Pretty much. Yeah, because he was sitting at his desk, yeah. So uncertain of what had happened, Walker walked out in front of his desk, and he kind of turned back to where he was sitting, and he saw a fresh bullet hole in the wall above his chair. Okay? And he went upstairs and got his pistol. Okay? So he turns around, looks the scene over, and finds a fresh bullet hole in the wall above his chair. Calls police, they arrive, and they notice plaster in his hair from where the bullet hit and then fell. So he's sitting kind of next to a wall. So the bullet comes through, ricochets off. If I'm trying to explain this, if I'm sitting, okay, if the window's here and I'm set next to a wall, that bullet came through and missed and hit the wall and actually put plaster in his hair.
Was he facing the window or is he
Facing away from the window.
Oh, okay.
See, I should have said that, yeah. He's sitting in his chair, the window's back here, and it misses and hits the wall in his home. So he's got plaster in his hair. The police say, he's got plaster in your hair. 2 hours later, a pale and sweaty Oswald walked into his Neely Street apartment without the rifle, because he stashed it. Okay? 2 hours later. Did it take Oswald 2 hours to get to Walker's house? No, but I really don't know what he was doing. Okay? Then 2 hours later, a pale and sweaty Oswald walked into the Neely Street apartment without his rifle. He had stashed it. Can you imagine the look on his wife's face when he got back? So Oswald collapses on the bed and he tells his frightened wife Marina, quote, "I shot Walker." What would be the next question Marina would ask him? Is he dead? And Oswald's response to that would be, I don't know. That's exactly right. So he goes in the house 2 hours later, collapses on the bed. The frightened Marine asks him, or he says to frightened Marine, I shot Walker. She responds by asking him if Walker was dead, and his statement to her was, I don't know. Now, I want you to listen to this. I want you to write this down. Just think about this, the next two statements. A few days later, Oswald returned for the weapon that he had hid after the assassination attempt. Went and got it. 7 months later, that rifle would be found in the Texas School Book Depository with 1 live round in the chamber and 3 spent shells nearby. That's the next time that rifle comes into play, is after they find it in the Texas School Book Depository. Now here's the thing that's kind of interesting. This incident that happened that night on the 10th, the next day on the 11th, it was in the Dallas newspaper. General Walker survives assassination attempt. They had no idea this is Oswald. None. Zero. So this is in the paper the next day. Okay? In the paper. Now, the note that Oswald left his wife prior to the assassination attempt on General Walker was later found in December 1963. You know this because she told you, after the assassination of President Kennedy. And the note was inside a book that Mrs. Payne, remember she told you, had delivered by police. She had it delivered by the police to Marina because Marina was down at police headquarters and she had the police send her some things she wanted, including the Russian cookbook that had the note inside. Remember that? And you remember that Mrs. Payne had no idea that that note was inside the book? But she was certainly questioned about it extensively after that. Okay? Now, 2 more points and we'll quit for the day. Could it be, you have to write this down, could it be that this failed attempt by Oswald set the stage for another assassination attempt, this time the President of the United States? And many historians, including, I'm kind of a historian, but many historians believe that if Oswald would have been successful in the assassination of General Walker, his attempt on the President would have never happened. Because what would have happened? He'd have got caught for sure. Okay? He was prepared to get caught. We're going to go over this note in just a second. I'm going to explain that to you. He doesn't shoot President Kennedy if he's successful here. He's probably going to be arrested, just like he was for shooting the President, right? Just like he was for shooting Tippit. They're going to investigate that and catch him. They were interested in in Walker being shot at, to a point, but he had a lot of enemies. A lot of crazy bastards could have shot at him, to be honest with you. How ironic was it that it was Lee Harvey Oswald? If he's successful in assassinating, they're going to put an effort out to find that person, and he's going to get caught. No doubt about it. And if he gets caught, where's he at on November 22nd, 1963? In jail. Think about that. And that's why Ruth Payne does not like to visit about this unless kids know the Walker situation. Yep.
How long was the rifle in the bush before he went back to get it?
Just a few days.
And they didn't look for
They didn't check
it?
because he didn't die, so they didn't really do anything.
Pretty
Yeah,
much.
but
I mean,
still,
they investigated. They didn't find it. I don't know anything about the bush or anything, but I'm guessing it was pretty well hidden to leave a rifle there where nobody saw it. But you're right, Burke. There's a lot of questions. But again, Caroline makes a good point off what I said. He had a lot of enemies. They weren't overly concerned that he had been shot at. You know what I mean? I mean, they were. But if they had killed him, it'd have been a full-blown investigation. And there's no question Oswald would have got caught. Because his wife knew, right? Things would start to add up. Okay? So keep that in mind. Now we're going to cover the note. But on Monday, we're going to talk about Oswald in New Orleans. After this happens, Oswald moves himself, kind of, to New Orleans. Okay, he tells Marine he's going to go to New Orleans. Is she going to discourage that? Right after this assassination attempt, is she going to discourage him going to New Orleans? No. She wants to get him out of Texas. So after this, he gets kind of nervous and he's going to go to New Orleans and he's going to do some interesting things there, then he's going to come back. Okay? All right, I'll give you this note because it's pretty interesting.
Does it go